They slept on snow and woke up alive. That sentence sounds impossible until you understand what sleeping warm really meant for Native Americans. Not luck or folklore, but a system built from hard facts and handed down for generations. The single biggest mistake most modern folks make about cold nights is focusing on the air above them. Indigenous survival taught the opposite. The ground beneath you is the enemy. Heat flows into solid objects far faster than into air. Lie directly on frozen soil or packed snow and your body becomes a heat sink. You don't just feel cold, your body is robbed of warmth until hypothermia takes over. The first and most important rule every child learned was simple and uncompromising. Never let your body touch the frozen earth. Everything else, furs, fire, food, depended on that principle. Preparation started long before anyone rolled up a hide. First came site selection, a quick, practiced judgment call. They avoided wind funnels and frost pockets. Low hollows where dense, cold air pooled were a death trap. Instead they picked leeward slopes, the lee of rock outcrops, or dense stands of conifers whose low boughs blocked wind. If trees were scarce, they stacked a snow wall or a log wall to block the gusts and create a sheltered pocket. Once the site was chosen, the bed was built from the ground up. A frame of thick branches or small logs lifted the sleeping area off the earth, then came layer after layer of insulating material, large conifer boughs, then smaller branch tips, then dry leaves, moss, or grass tucked in to fill voids. The secret isn't any single material, it's the trapped air between those layers. Air held still is the best natural insulator available, and a properly prepared mat 20 to 30 centimeters thick would compress only slightly under a sleeper's weight, preserving the precious pockets of air that kept body heat from bleeding into the frozen ground. Furs were chosen deliberately, not sentimentally. People who lived through long winters knew which hides did what. Bison robes were the heavyweight champions on the plains. Dense, long-haired, they made hardy mattresses and communal blankets. In forested regions, moose and deer hides were prized because the hairs are hollow, adding insulating airspace. A couple of sewn hides made a warm sleeping pallet. But for the layer closest to the skin, softer furs like beaver or otter were preferred. Short, dense undercoats that resist moisture and keep warmth close. Bear skins, contrary to modern assumptions, were often used more for outer protection than for direct sleeping contact because their coarse guard hairs didn't trap air as effectively next to skin. Rabbit skins provided incredible loft and a light, comfortable inner layer when stitched into blankets. Women's tanning and softening work mattered as much as the hunt itself. A stiff hide was cold and useless. A properly dressed robe was like high-grade insulation you could roll up and carry. Fire was not theatrics, it was engineered. Long smoldering fires, 2 large logs stacked to burn slowly, produced hours of steady embers, not a flashy blaze that wasted fuel. The star fire and reflective walls were 2 standard tactics. Logs radiated slow heat, and a stone or packed snow reflector on the far side of the fire bounced warmth back toward the sleeping niche. Camp layout placed the bed between fire and reflector so heat approached from the front while the warmed wall radiated from behind. Hunters prepared night fuel in advance. Dry hardwood split and stacked under shelter so they could keep the fire feeding without scavenging in freezing darkness. Watch duty was routine. Someone tended embers, adjusted logs, and kept sparks away from bedding. A well-managed fire and prepared fuel supply could provide steady, safe warmth through the worst hours before dawn. Hot stones were perhaps the most elegant, low-tech battery they had. Carefully chosen, dense rocks were heated slowly in embers, wrapped in hide or cloth, then placed among bedding to radiate stored heat all night. The trick was choosing non-porous stones and wrapping them so heat released gradually instead of burning through hides. A pair of stones warmed at the feet and one near the torso could make the difference between a shivering wake-up and a comfortable morning. The stones were reusable. Cooled stones went back to the fire and a fresh set took their place. Simple physics, heat capacity and slow release, turned hunks of rock into personal heaters you could carry. When dogs were available, they were living heaters. In many northern and subarctic communities, dogs slept against people or under covers, sharing body heat and acting as warm living pads. Dogs served many roles: haulers, hunters, alarms, but their warmth on a cold night was invaluable. Sleeping close in groups was another deliberate survival measure. Bodies clustered together create a shared microclimate. People tucked the most vulnerable, infants and elders, at the center of the group where adult bodies and furs radiated warmth from all sides. Survival was therefore communal by design. Nighttime arrangements were practical instructions: who slept where, whose duty it was to tend fire, how to rotate hot stones, and where to stash emergency fuel. Clothing was treated as part of the bedding system rather than something to be shed. Garments were layered with the fur side in or out depending on need. At night people usually kept multiple layers on, gently loosened rather than removed. Moccasins stuffed with dry grass or moss acted as disposable insoles. Wet materials were removed and replaced when possible, keeping feet dry and insulating. Head coverings, mittens, and tucked hands under armpits were simple but effective ways to reduce heat loss from the extremities. The rule everyone respected: keep clothes dry. Damp material destroys insulation. Drying gear by the fire, rotating layers, and preventing sweat during exertion were everyday practices that kept people alive. Skill mattered as much as gear. Reading the terrain, where cold pooled, which slopes shed wind, where drifted snow would form insulating banks, came from lifelong observation. Children learned by doing: how to select boughs that shed snow, how tightly to pack leaves which hides to place next to the skin. That oral, taught, practiced body of knowledge was as critical as any tool. Physiology played a role, too. Generations living in cold climates developed better cold tolerance than newcomers, and calm, confident people conserve heat better than those who panic. These were not tricks for spectacle. They were repeatable, reliable systems. Insulate from below, choose furs that trap air, manage long smoldering fires and hot stones, sleep together for shared warmth, keep clothing dry and layered, and read the landscape. Done properly, a winter camp could make -40 nights survivable and even reasonably comfortable. If you found this useful, hit subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Where are you watching from and which of these cold night methods surprised you most? Fire meant life, but only if you knew how to make it obey you. For Native Americans, a campfire wasn't a decoration or comfort feature. It was an instrument, a precisely tuned device for survival. Modern campers often picture a big roaring blaze, sparks flying and smoke curling toward the stars. But for a person sleeping outside at 40 below, that kind of fire was useless. All the heat would rise straight into the sky. What they built instead were slow, deliberate fires that worked like a furnace on the ground, heating people, not the air. They had different types for different purposes. The long fire was the most famous. 2 thick logs, each the length of a man, were laid parallel with a narrow trench of coals between them. Thin chips or bark were slipped inside to keep the draft steady. Once lit, the logs didn't burn fast or bright. They smoldered, glowing red for hours, spreading warmth sideways. A properly built long fire could radiate heat all night without anyone getting up to stoke it. Hunters and travelers loved it because they could lie down beside it and feel steady warmth from head to toe. That kind of practical genius didn't come from chance. It came from generations testing what worked and passing the results down. Another version was the star fire. 5 or 6 heavy logs arranged like spokes of a wheel, their ends meeting in the center. Only the tips burned. As the outer ends cooled, they were pushed inward, feeding the flames slowly and evenly. That design wasted almost nothing, which mattered when wood was scarce. Each tribe had small variations on these techniques, but the principle was universal: build the fire to serve the sleeper, not the other way around. Then there was the heat reflector, one of the cleverest additions. Imagine sitting by a fire with your back cold while your front burns. That's the problem it solved. They built a low wall of logs, stones, or even packed snow behind the fire, angled toward the sleeping spot. The heat that would have been lost backward bounced off the wall and back onto the people. It doubled the effectiveness without burning extra fuel. Between the long fire and the reflector wall, they created a warm pocket of air even under the open sky. It was like an outdoor oven that you could lie inside. Fuel choice mattered too. Dry hardwood, oak, maple, birch, burned long and produced glowing coals that released steady heat. Softwood was fine for kindling but burned too quickly. Before dusk, people prepared the night's fuel supply, stacking it neatly under a slanted cover of bark or branches so it would stay dry even in snow. Everyone in camp knew that running out of dry wood in the middle of the night could mean frostbite or worse. That's why someone always stayed half awake, tending embers, turning logs, watching for sparks that might catch the bedding. It was a shared duty, part of the rhythm of life. But the real stroke of brilliance came when they figured out how to take that heat with them, even into bed. Heated stones were the first portable heaters long before metal stoves existed. The stones had to be dense and solid, never from a riverbed because trapped moisture could make them explode. They were nestled into the coals for hours, slowly absorbing the fire's energy. Then, using sticks, they were rolled out, wrapped in bark, hide, or thick cloth, and placed in the bedding. One near the feet, one near the midsection, sometimes a small one near the chest. The warmth lasted for hours, long after the fire had burned down. A good set of stones could make the difference between shivering through the night or waking up rested and strong. There's something almost poetic about that system. No metal, no tools, just an understanding of how the earth itself holds heat. Yet to the people using it, it was simply common sense. They saw the world as a workshop, every element, fire, rock, snow, bark, a partner in staying alive. It's easy to romanticize it now, but for them it was just life, and every fire told a story of cooperation with nature, not domination over it. And then there were the dogs, the living blankets. In northern regions, dogs weren't pets, they were survival partners. Thick-coated, muscular, and bred for endurance, these animals worked by day pulling loads and guarded camp by night. When temperatures dropped dangerously, they became living heaters. Families and hunters alike would let the dogs curl beside them under the hides. Each dog gave off as much warmth as a small fire, and sleeping close created a microclimate where man and animal shared heat. There are stories from the Arctic plains of lone travelers surviving blizzards only because they slept between their dogs. Loyalty wasn't sentimental, it was reciprocal necessity. That bond went deeper than warmth. Dogs served as night watchmen, their sharp senses detecting movement long before humans did. Their presence brought security, both physical and emotional. You could close your eyes knowing someone, or something, was always alert. To a weary hunter far from camp, that mattered as much as fire or food. It was the ancient version of a home alarm system, powered by trust and instinct. Even the smallest details in their nightly routines reflected careful reasoning. Before sleeping, they loosened clothing slightly to allow circulation, stuffed moccasins with dry grass to wick away moisture, and tucked their hands and feet into shared hides so no part of the body was exposed. Breath was kept inside the fur cocoon. The exhaled air stayed warm and humid, preventing the cold dry air from cracking lips or freezing the lungs. Every movement had logic behind it, tested by experience. Modern survival instructors often rediscover these same principles and call them advanced techniques. But centuries before that, Native Americans practiced them as everyday wisdom. They didn't see nature as hostile, just as something you needed to understand. Fire, stones, furs, dogs, none of it was magic. It was knowledge refined through generations of trial, error, and respect for the elements. If this story makes you rethink what primitive really means, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It helps keep these lessons from fading like embers at dawn. Clothing for Native Americans wasn't fashion, it was survival engineering. Every stitch, every layer, every fold had a purpose. What we now call layering systems in modern outdoor gear, base layer, insulation, outer shell, they had already perfected centuries ago without synthetic fibers or factory technology. They built their protection directly from what the land offered, guided by deep observation of how warmth, moisture, and air really behave. The foundation of their system was simple but ingenious. Double-layered garments made of fur turned in opposite directions. The inner layer kept the fur facing inward toward the body, the outer layer faced fur outward toward the snow and wind. Between those two layers sat countless tiny pockets of trapped air, the same principle that keeps modern down jackets effective. Air doesn't conduct heat well, so by trapping it in place, they built a natural thermal barrier. It wasn't luxury, it was life insurance. A well-made parka or robe could mean the difference between sleep and hypothermia. Hunters and travelers wore their outer furs large and loose, allowing extra air to circulate while also letting them move freely. Tight clothing was dangerous. It restricted circulation and made a person colder. The ideal was comfort through breathability. They knew instinctively what scientists later wrote in books. Warmth doesn't come from the material itself, but from the air it traps and the dryness it maintains. They also treated clothing as part of the sleeping system, not separate from it. When night came, people didn't strip down. They loosened their belts, untied sleeves, and simply tucked their layered garments inside the bedding of hides and branches. A person lay down fully dressed, letting body heat build slowly inside the enclosed space. The garments acted as an extra insulation layer between skin and the outside cold. Their hooded parkas sealed around the face, leaving only a narrow slit for breathing. The fur around the edge captured moisture and frost, keeping it away from the skin. Modern explorers still use that same trick without even realizing where it came from. Foot protection was treated with the same precision. Moccasins weren't just shoes, they were adaptive systems. At night, the inside was filled with dry grass or moss, simple materials that absorbed moisture, added cushioning, and provided insulation. Each morning, the used stuffing was thrown away and replaced. This daily ritual ensured that feet stayed dry, the #1 rule in cold survival. Wet feet meant frostbite and frostbite meant death. Hands and heads got special attention too. Warm mittens made from beaver or rabbit fur, sometimes lined with soft deerskin, allowed hunters to handle tools without freezing. Head coverings were critical because a huge portion of heat escapes from the scalp. They wore fur caps, hoods, or wrapped scarves that could be adjusted depending on the wind. A sleeping person never left their head uncovered. Even a small breeze could undo hours of careful heat conservation. But the real mastery went beyond materials. It lay in understanding dryness. They knew that moisture was the silent killer of warmth. Wet clothes weren't just uncomfortable. They destroyed insulation completely. That's why, after a day's journey, garments were dried immediately by the fire. They built small wooden racks around the coals, turning clothes slowly so that the heat didn't scorch the hide but evaporated moisture evenly. A careless traveler who ignored this rule would wake up colder each night until his strength gave out. The genius of their design was adaptability. Winter wear could become bedding in seconds. A parka spread on the ground became a base layer. Another turned over the body became a blanket. Hides and robes could be folded, tied, or overlapped depending on the weather. Families often shared the heaviest bison robes, spreading them over several sleepers at once to trap heat collectively. Children and elders slept in the middle, surrounded by adults whose combined body warmth turned the entire shelter into one living furnace. But their defense against the cold wasn't only physical, it was mental. Modern science confirms what they already knew through experience. Fear and tension accelerate heat loss. Panic makes you breathe faster, spend more energy, and sweat into your clothing, which later freezes. Calmness, confidence, and familiarity with the cold kept their bodies efficient. They didn't see the night frost as an enemy to fight but as a condition to respect. That mindset alone gave them an enormous advantage over anyone unprepared. They also understood the rhythm of the environment in a way we've mostly forgotten. When to build a fire, when to save fuel, when to move, and when to stay still. If the snow whispered and the wind shifted direction, it wasn't superstition, it was data. They could read weather patterns from the sound of trees or the sharpness of starlight. When the ground grew brittle underfoot, it meant a temperature drop was coming. This awareness allowed them to prepare long before the cold struck hard. At the core of their survival was observation, the same tool we have, just more finely tuned. They didn't own thermometers or insulated boots, but they knew the behavior of heat, air, and water better than most modern hikers. To them, every fire, every hide, every snowbank was part of a living system. A night at 40 below wasn't a challenge. It was a familiar rhythm of preparation, patience, and trust in collective knowledge. Even their language reflected it. Many indigenous words for warmth and safety shared the same root as together. Warmth wasn't an individual state, it was communal. You didn't have heat, you shared it. That belief echoed in everything they built, wore, or taught. It turned simple materials, bark, fur, grass, stone, into components of a larger harmony that kept them alive for centuries in places most of us wouldn't last a night. So, next time you zip up a modern sleeping bag or adjust your parka hood, remember, the idea isn't new. It was perfected long before nylon or zippers ever existed. It came from people who learned to sleep beneath the stars and wake up smiling in a world made of snow. If this part gave you a new respect for the quiet brilliance of indigenous innovation, hit like and share it. Their knowledge deserves to be remembered, not buried under frost and forgetfulness. Choosing where to sleep in a frozen wilderness was as important as the fire or the furs. To the untrained eye, every patch of snow looks the same. But to an experienced hunter or elder, the land spoke its own quiet language. The shape of the wind-swept drifts, the direction of bent grasses, the sound of the trees, all these told them where warmth still lingered and where death waited. Finding the right place meant reading the earth like a map drawn in invisible ink. The first rule was always wind. The wind steals warmth faster than ice. A single gust could tear away the layer of mild air around the body and replace it with biting cold. So they sought protection. A stand of thick conifers was ideal: fir, spruce, pine. The low branches caught the snow, forming a natural wall against the wind. Beneath those heavy boughs, the air was calmer, and the snow itself became insulation. In the dim green space under the trees, one could build a small fire that burned steady, shielded from gusts that might snuff it out in the open. If no trees stood nearby, the land itself provided shelter. Hillsides, ravines, rock ledges, these became allies. The leeward side of a slope, where the wind passed overhead, was always warmer than the exposed crest. Even a shallow depression could hold a pocket of still air, while a boulder offered a backrest that blocked the draft. Experienced scouts memorized such places during their travels. In their minds, the landscape wasn't hostile. It was a companion full of hidden shelters waiting to be recognized. Snow, paradoxically, was another friend. Though it seems deadly, snow traps air, making it an excellent insulator. In deep drifts, they dug shallow pits or trenches and lined them with branches and hides. Inside, the air remained still and surprisingly mild. A snow wall or a curved barrier of packed drifts could transform an open field into a calm, warm hollow. Many early explorers later adopted the same trick, calling it a snow trench bivouac, but the idea was as old as the tribes themselves. They never chose to sleep at the bottoms of valleys. That was where cold air flowed at night, settling like invisible water. Instead, they camped slightly higher, where the air was lighter and drier. They also avoided solitary trees. During heavy snowfall, the weight could snap branches without warning. Every choice was guided by balance: protection from the wind, access to dry fuel, and safety from falling wood or flooding meltwater. It was geometry mixed with instinct. But even the best location meant little if one slept alone. The true warmth of the night came from people. A single body loses heat quickly. 2 or 3 together conserve it. A whole family huddled under one hide became a living source of warmth stronger than any fire. Native Americans understood this long before science gave it numbers. They arranged themselves with purpose, elders and children at the center, adults forming a ring around them. The heavy bison robes covered everyone like one giant cocoon. The shared heat moved slowly between bodies, equalizing temperature and keeping all safe. In the larger dwellings like tipis or wigwams, the layout followed the same logic. The fire pit always sat at the center, a symbol of both warmth and life. Sleeping places radiated outward like the spokes of a wheel, so everyone received equal heat. Airflow from the smoke flaps above drew smoke upward and fresh air downward, preventing suffocation even during the longest nights. It was an early example of climate control, achieved without machines, just intelligent design. Group sleeping wasn't just practical, it was cultural. Warmth wasn't seen as a personal possession. It was shared like food or stories. The night gathered the tribe into one breathing organism. Children drifted to sleep listening to the quiet murmur of voices, the soft crackle of firewood, and the rhythmic breathing of relatives. It was safety you could feel with every heartbeat. Modern society calls it loss of personal space. For them, it was survival through unity. Even during hunts or journeys, the same principle applied. Warriors slept side by side, wrapping their cloaks together. The first to wake tended the fire while the others slept. They trusted each other completely. One man's alertness meant another man's rest. This silent cooperation built not just warmth but community. To live like that meant understanding that your life depended on others and theirs on you. It created bonds stronger than any rope or weapon. Their nights weren't just about endurance. They were about connection, with each other, with the land, and with the invisible rhythm of the world. Every breath of warm air shared beneath a robe, every spark rising into the night sky, carried a reminder: survival wasn't conquest. It was harmony. When settlers later arrived, building cabins of heavy logs and sealing themselves away, they called the native ways primitive. But they missed the point. The indigenous approach didn't isolate people from the elements, it wove them into the elements themselves. They also passed this understanding to their children not through lectures but through practice. A child learned where to sleep by following an elder into the snow, watching where he stopped, where he knelt, how he tested the wind with his hand. The knowledge wasn't written, it was lived. Each generation built upon the last, refining methods through success and failure until what remained wasn't guesswork. It was science shaped by experience. The result was a culture that saw the environment not as an obstacle but as a teacher. Every night in the cold became a lesson in patience, cooperation, and humility. To lie under the open sky and feel safe required not just materials but faith. Faith in your tribe, in your skills, and in the land that held you. That spiritual calm was itself a form of heat. Fear wasted energy, trust preserved it. So when we imagine them sleeping through howling blizzards or on plains buried in snow, we shouldn't picture them suffering or trembling. We should picture quiet competence. A fire glowing low, hides pulled close, snow walls standing guard, and hearts beating in unison beneath the winter stars. That was their world, not comfort as we define it but balance. Not luxury but wisdom. In every branch bed, every carefully placed stone, and every shared blanket lay a simple truth. The cold could be mastered not by force but by understanding. Their survival wasn't luck or toughness alone. It was the victory of knowledge passed through generations who refused to forget what nature tried to teach them. So as the last embers fade and dawn touches the snow, imagine that calm. No panic, no noise. Just warmth where logic, skill, and trust came together. A civilization that thrived not because it defied nature, but because it listened to her. If you believe this wisdom deserves to be remembered, not lost to time, share it. Subscribe to help keep these stories alive, because the warmth of knowledge, like the warmth of fire, only lasts if we keep passing it on.